Welcome to the African Week Utility Studio. I am Denise and I'm the content manager for Engerati, and we are privileged to have Sarah Stans with us today. And Sarah, you represent Wind for Communities Working Group. Can you expand on your roles and tell us what you are all about?
Yeah, that's right. So we, as a working group, we are one of the work streams that comes out of SUIA. You'll have different ones like logistics and PR, marketing, and different elements which substantiate the development of wind in South Africa. And there's close relationship with GWEC, which is the Global Wind Energy Association, and other global consortiums, and we try to work together to try to provide an enabling environment. So with Wind for Communities, we do research and we try to find ways in which to provide the most benefit for communities, and how are these kind of implemented with the confines of the REIPP, and how do we work with governments, and so looking at things like job creation, looking at different policy documents and how their alignment and with implementation of community development initiatives, socioeconomic development, enterprise development, and how these become more fast-tracked so that there's more of reality and the expectations and deliverables are met.
I mean, renewable energy seems to be the way to go as far as these outlying communities are concerned, where they just don't have access to the transmission infrastructure, centralized grid, they just don't have access to it. And it seems to me that renewables is the way to go. Are there quite a few challenges facing these communities with regards to developing this clean energy to these communities?
Absolutely. I mean, you touched on two things there, you know, the opportunities for one, which is that they're located in these rural communities where there may not be a potential for infrastructure development, which in turn creates job opportunities, opportunities of economic development, local supply chain, which is all defined very nicely in the REIPP, that the developers have to meet these targets. So the challenge is, it starts on the ground. So if you're a developer and getting that land acquisition set in place, so and it really depends on if you're working in tribal land or if you're working with several landowners and farmers. There's the cultural differences, the language differences, there's the servitude agreements. So if you're putting lines and putting roads in to build these things, there's a promise and there's a assumption that there's going to be jobs and some kind of opportunity. But with a servitude agreement, you can't necessarily provide anything but maybe a lease agreement. So there aren't job opportunities necessarily with that. Otherwise, the exclusion, so of only having one land or access to that land for the developer is sometimes muddled. So local communities might not understand that if you promise to give them exclusivity, then you didn't know that you couldn't sign an agreement with them either. And then who has the decision-making rights of that land? Is it municipal land, and is it the king who can have permission to give away that land, or was it earmarked for some other kind of development? So these are some of the very basic preliminary challenges of just accessing.
They sound very complex.
The land, and
I'm sure they become even more complex as the development takes place with all these projects.
So that's even before you even bid. So. In the recent allocation, the bid window round 4, there was over 5,000 megawatts that was submitted for approval to be a preferred bidder. And it was just a little over 1,100 of those megawatts were actually given preferred bidder status. So the development is there, the competition is there. Despite all those challenges, developers are finding ways in which to secure land agreements and to really try to put projects and get them bid ready. And then it becomes government, and there's selective criteria.
And then it will get slotted into a strategy, and then from there they will carry the project forward. And I was speaking to two key industry players in South Africa today, and they were just saying that there seems to be a huge time lapse, a huge gap between getting the bids in, so getting the renewable project started, but then there's no infrastructure on the other side. And the one woman was saying to me that perhaps it's better to actually, sort of develop this distributed generation, or to try and get microgrids in, or just to get the, get these people access to clean power, a lot quicker than what it's been happening. There just seems to be a lot of red tape and a lot of gaps in communication and in project development. Have you noticed that throughout your research, that there seems to be a gap between the start of a project and then the actual processing of that project to get it online?
Yes, so the timeline for, so utility scale is where these renewables projects are happening, that we hear all the buzz about. They're REIPP, small projects still haven't happened. So this is utility scale, connect to the grid, trying to alleviate some of the gap that Eskom is facing. I think, Eskom, they're in full support of a distributed generation environment, which is more in the commercial, industrial, even domestic side. So if you can alleviate the constraints that are on the grid, and create more energy efficiency, then the opportunities are there. Especially if you're talking about skills development and job creation. You're creating more of a operations and maintenance industry. So where technicians don't necessarily need to have the high level skill that a BTech or an O&M technician of a utility scale will need to have. So it does have the potential to create more jobs as long as there's massive rollouts. To create the same opportunities and jobs and skills of a 75 megawatt plant. So if you've got a 75 megawatt plant, someone will say it doesn't create very many jobs per megawatts, compared to distributed generation.
Right.
But you still need a lot of distributed generation to create that
kind of skill and that as far as creating the skill is concerned, I mean, how are you guys overcoming that, or how how is that coming about? Are there colleges in place, or what skills are you developing exactly? There's a lot of transferable skills, so I think international companies, when they first came in the country, let's say in 2009, 2010, and then the reality of having to implement in 2012, where are we going to get these guys? Are they going to come from Eskom, the Eskom environment, which is kind of different, the utility environment is a little bit different than a renewable energy IPP. Exactly.
And it is, though, just learning maybe a different technology. So there were a lot more transferable skills and very intelligent engineers, theoretical thinkers. Where the gap is what we've identified in our studies. Is the gap is the mid-level, so it's the artisanal level, it's the technicians, and the technicians in the local communities where these IPPs are built. So there can be a lot of technicians sitting in Cape Town and Joburg, but to convince them that they've got to go live into R, they're going to say, well, are you going to pay me 1.5 million rand? That's high level, plant managers even. So becomes
quite a huge problem. You've got a huge skills gap, I would imagine.
A relative gap,
So how is this being overcome? What are they doing?
There are some colleges that are put in place.
Okay.
There is so in the universities, Stellenbosch has got a program. UCT's got a program. This is all the engineering level. When you come down to the technical level, KPUT has put together a partnership, with Ceratec. And I believe they're going to start training their first wind turbine technicians in the beginning of July. So they'll have 10 turbine technicians that come out of that.
Right.
And you have to come in with a little bit of experience. So you have to have some relative mechanical or electrical experience. And then they put you through the program, And it's still addressing, the need. I think it is quite an expensive program. And I think a lot of companies would rather train their personnel themselves, which can include sending them over to Europe for a 3-month intensive course with other training institutions that are already in place. A lot what happens with these delays and in this program, it's really uncertain. So you don't know what the horizon is. You don't know when when are you going to reach financial close? When are we going to build? And so when are we going to be awarded? If we're going to be awarded. So how much do you invest into developing, let's say, putting 30 people together, training them if you don't know when you're going to be building. And when you know you're going to be building, you're going to be building. And then the
I imagine there's a lot of uncertainty all around. I mean, from the transmission side to the skill side to the actual start of the project. I mean, it's obviously a very complex thing to put together. Where do you see specifically South Africa at the moment? Because we've got a big issue with load shedding and that. And I do think renewables will help that situation somewhat in the long run. But where do you see as far as wind energy development is concerned, where do you see it in 5 to 10 years' time?
We would like to see just the base case, which is the IRP, which commits to 1,000 megawatts annually being implemented every year. Now, with the REIP allocations now, we're just a little bit short of that. So wind is sitting around 600 to 650, sometimes over 700, and PV is sitting less than 500 megawatts annually. So it would be great to have an enabling environment whether it's a government or a preferred bidder or more industrial commercialization, more on the PV side, but it's relevant a little bit to wind. For that to happen, 1,000 megawatts to be rolled over every year, and there'd be more localization, manufacturing opportunities, more certainty in the market. So, I mean, it's out of my expertise, on what would be the solutions for that. How do we get 1,000 megawatts every year? But that would be, we would like to see that. Wind has a lifespan. It's not when it's implemented, but the efficiency of a wind turbine can only be 59%. Okay, so it's the maximum you can get. So with solar coming down, and it's not as cheap as wind. Wind is the cheapest utility scale energy that you can put onto the grid. It's cheaper than coal, cheaper than PV, it's cheaper than any technology. So I would think, my strategy if I was in government is that I would try to maximize putting as much wind as you could while the time period, while it's still cheap. And then in that, let's say about 30 years, 20 or 30 years, wind isn't going to be able to keep up with the efficiencies and the cost, of other technologies. But that's kind of what we see. So
that sounds like a good strategy for the next 5 to 10 years. Sarah for president?
American president.
Just one last question. I mean, with regards to wind development, there's a lot of, especially the mining industry. They probably a little bit nervous with the unreliable power supplies that we're getting in the country, and in fact around Africa. A lot of them are putting generators in. Some of them just cease operation because they can't, in some industries just can't, they just have to close shop when the power goes down. And do you think more and more of these industries will snap up their own wind energy development projects and actually just almost go off the grid, once storage is at a good rate, energy storage, solutions are at good prices? I mean, do you see this happening in the future in Africa? Do you think that would be a solution for many people in industries, especially the mining industry?
Yeah, I see, this is only my perception, it's out of my expertise. And where those PPAs are being signed, into Africa. And I know there's big support, with other African utilities and CEOs and, really committing to renewable energy future, within that commercial. So within cogeneration or using other technologies, I'm not sure if wind energy is the best solution for that, but as far as renewables, absolutely. There's a desire to do business. There will be a desire to make a plan, that if the traditional national grid can supply them with those needs. From a technical perspective, I'm not sure which technology is the best solution, that can offer that. But you definitely see a move to that. We were listening, I think his name was Amos from Power Africa, this morning, and saying that every business's dream, international dream, is to do business in Africa. And that's quite exciting. And whether how much truth is to that, I'm sure a lot.
Well, there's good resources here, rich resources, but and many of them have been untapped, probably because of maybe inefficient power supplies. I'm not sure, but my last question: if you had one message to give to vendors, utilities, what would it be? What is your message to them today?
To utilities.
To utilities, to vendors, to developers, to project managers, who do you want to appeal to, and what is your message to them?
Well, I'm trained. I was trained as an artist, and I was trained as a sustainable development practitioner. And we work with vision a lot. So you look at the end goal, and you create the vision, and then you create how do we attain those goals in order to reach that vision. So if you see local communities, and there are fair and meaningful job creation within those local communities, and you're really leveraging the opportunity of the IPP to create that vision. And a vision not just in local communities, but local manufacturing and within South Africa. And what do we see those economies and those green economies transitioning to? Change is scary for people, and people are very hesitant. So I would say to focus on the vision, and to spend more time on that vision rather than putting out fires and responding to the immediate needs of maybe the energy crisis.
Well, that sounds fair to me. Vision is obviously what's going to push your project forward. Sarah, thank you so much for your time, and I trust that you enjoy the rest of the conference and the presentation. And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. If you go onto the NGRT website, there are a number of studio interviews that you can click on, so enjoy those, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.